1823 brought a new church and a new pastor to the 53 Souls on Cranberry Street. He was Joseph Sanford, age 26, serious and passionate, who, at the beginning of his career, must have seen a clear path open up before his eyes. In June, having just graduated from Princeton Theological Seminary, he received the call to come to Brooklyn. He left Princeton in September, married Anna Jackson of Philadelphia, and was installed in the new pulpit of First Presbyterian Church on October 16th. Life's opportunities must have seemed to Sanford like a series of ascending steps, as the minister rose and looked out over his assembled flock, perhaps to bask in the excitement that the Long Island Star conveyed when describing his new home.
The new brick church is in the Gothic style and is very neat and commodious. The pulpit and pews are in conformity with modern taste. A steeple and clock will shortly be added and render the building an ornament, and we trust an honor to the village. The congregation has appeared to spring from our rapid growth and prosperity.
Sanford was filled with a sense of his mission. His zeal and energy, which masked his fragile health, impressed his congregation, many of whom were much older than their minister. But then tragedy overtook him. On December 6th, after only 3 months of marriage, his wife Anna suddenly died. His profound loss seemed to knit him more closely to the life of the church. Emerging from his grief, Sanford threw himself into his ministry.
His brick church was fast becoming an easily identifiable landmark. Its rising steeple set off the structure against rooftops of Brooklyn's growing population. But despite the vaunted grandeur of a four-faced steeple clock, its gear-driven workings proved a source of frustration when the hour hands kept seizing up, an embarrassment that could only be remedied by regular maintenance.
Church membership expanded to over 300 people, requiring the physical structure to be enlarged. Rooms were added to the side and the rear of the building.
Increasingly, civic activities gravitated to the brick church, including a benefit concert of sacred music to raise money for the people of Greece in their fight for independence from Turkey. And later, in 1834, when Brooklyn Village received its charter to become the City of Brooklyn, the celebration of this milestone was held in the church's sanctuary. As First Presbyterian grew, Sanford founded one of the first Sunday schools in Brooklyn and insisted that parents send their children
to save them from what he called the weekly overflowing of the lava from the great volcano of vice and immorality in our immediate vicinity.
Time kept moving forward despite the church clock's fickle inability to measure it. And for Joseph Sanford, it was time for a change. He remarried, and in January 1829, he left to take up the call of the Second Presbyterian Church of Philadelphia. But his ministry was cut short when only 2 years later, Sanford died on Christmas Day, 1831, leaving behind a widow and their 15-month-old son. Joseph Sanford's body was returned to the Brooklyn church that he had helped to grow, to be interred beside his first wife, Anna,
in a place only steps away from the voices of children in the Sunday school he created.
The church sent out a call for a new pastor and found him in Daniel Carroll, another Princeton graduate who assumed his position in March 1829, just 2 months after Sanford left. By 1830, the church enrollment numbered 418. In the coming year, it would increase by more than 100, made up, it is believed, entirely by white parishioners. Brooklyn's black population founded the African Wesleyan Methodist Episcopal Church. Built in 1819, it was established to protest the practice of another Brooklyn Methodist church that tried to charge African Americans $10 per quarter to be relegated to the balcony.
Once again, New Yorkers were beset by a deadly epidemic, this time in the form of cholera, which spread to Brooklyn and destroyed the belief in the healthy benefits of its clean air. June 28, 1832 was set aside
as a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer on account of that awful pestilence, the cholera.
The epidemic would continue to plague New York, a city already exhausted by airborne diseases, and it presented itself as a test of faith for this and other Brooklyn congregations.
Reverend Carroll stated that the climate of Brooklyn did not agree with him, and so, in 1835, having built his congregation to 600 people, he departed to Virginia to become president of Hampton-Sydney College. More trouble was coming. It arrived in the form of a doctrinal dispute between one branch of Presbyterianism and another. It would present a schism, dividing those who adhered to an old school of Calvinism versus a more liberal interpretation of Calvin's teachings. The old school, as it was called, resided primarily among the southern states, and the new school found a receptive following in the Northeast.
The schism soon was to manifest into a division between Brooklyn's anti-slavery churchgoers and those who had business ties to the slaveholding South. The 1820 census counted a village population of 11,275, of whom 740 were enslaved people and 822 were free blacks. New York abolished slavery in 1827, but how did the continuing presence of slavery within the United States impinge on the spirit of Christianity in First Church?
The answer might be drawn from the words of our church's first pastor. Reverend Sanford preached that there was immorality in our immediate vicinity. His words were wise, if unintentionally so, because immorality didn't just reside in the pieties against drunkenness and prostitution. It was in our original sin of slavery. And with increased frequency, ships arrived in our northern ports bearing sugar, molasses, and rum, all drawn from the labor of enslaved people. The docksides along the river offloaded tar and turpentine from the slaveholding South to seal Brooklyn's rooftops and paint Brooklyn's fast-rising houses. And white Brooklynites dressed in the seductive coolness of cotton. The fruits of slavery were ubiquitous.
And while some condemned slavery outright, others sought to recalibrate their morality in order to accept the material benefits from what they considered its necessary evils. They, along with their abolitionist fellow worshipers, entered the doors of First Church and sought salvation from the same God. How, then, could one begin to unstitch the tightly woven fabric of racism?
That would remain an unanswered question, and it would continue to follow First Church into the future.
But meanwhile, the congregation found a leader who could bear witness to the violence of racial hatred and who would challenge them during the unsettled times ahead. His name was Samuel Hanson Cox, and he would come to be known as Brooklyn's first abolitionist. He was called to our church in the winter of 1836, and in the spring of 1837, he came.